All right, I am glad to have you here. Just want to talk about some of the biggest things we've been working on this week, other than preparing for House bills. I think you saw that I filed SJR 19, which is the bill to reject the social studies standards that Superintendent Walters developed with outside political influences, and also support. I'm the House author for Cindy Munson's HJR 1030 that does the same thing. I think this was really important for us to stand for students and what we think educators need to be prioritizing in the classroom. And then the other big thing is this week, the first announcements about the Elon Musk style program that our governor's implementing here, and trying to research and understand concerns about monies that are going to be sent back to the federal government. Our concerns about that being, federal taxpayer dollars that have been dedicated to programs in our state that are serving people. I think some of the highlights of my concern being anything that cuts back on diabetes prevention is a deep concern. We have some of the highest rates in the country. Definitely things around. The other big one I kept looking at was about our lab's ability to process testing. And I know it came out of the COVID era, but our lab is still not up to full speed. And so I think any monies we're sending back that could be used for laboratory capacity really concerns me. So we're trying to find out more about those cuts, how they're going to be implemented locally, and how they affect the State Department of Health and its ability to operate all over our state and serve people and prevent diseases that are unnecessary. So those are the two big things we've been working on. What do you guys want to talk about?
Mine kind of goes with that. Mm-hmm. So DHHS federally, Kennedy cut 10,000 workers. LIHEAP, all of its staff was completely cut. Mm-hmm. 180,000 Oklahoma households depend, according to their website, depend on LIHEAP. Can I get your response to that? I mean, is there going to be a conversation about the state picking up the slack for that if that ends up going away, LIHEAP does?
Well, I'll be part of that conversation, but I certainly won't be leading that conversation. I think we have to look at what is impacting households in our state. I know that working families are suffering from some of these cuts already. And I bet there's not a transition plan there. And so that's one of my concerns when we're implementing, Elon Musk style stuff here. How are we making sure it's not hurting people and that transition is reasonable? We absolutely need to become more efficient. We always need to look at efficiency, but just to lop something off in the middle of a year where there's not people to answer questions, that's a deep concern. I also heard this week about cuts to gear funding. Higher ed had gotten a multi-year grant. Our local communities, like I heard about a program in Weatherford, elsewhere, that was already working with kids to try to get them excited to come to college, spent that money and then can't get reimbursed from the federal government. It's a deep concern. We can't be recklessly cutting things that have impacts on our kids.
Yeah. On the topic of possibly recklessly cutting things, the governor stated yesterday that he is interested in cutting the forestry department altogether, which does more than just prevent and manage fires. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Since hearing about the forestry issue, I've talked to several local firefighters. They're all really worried about that and think they really respected that leader and felt like he did a good job of helping them deal with what they can manage. Our fire departments have a district that they work in. If we're going to suddenly transition everything to local leadership, how does that work when things cross county lines? How does that work when things cross our municipal lines? And there has to be a transition plan. If we're talking about running our state like a business, we would do stakeholder analysis and actually look at who's being served, right? I talked to a mayor this week about their fire district and how they're serving a ton of new neighborhoods that aren't actually paying taxes in their community because they're in the fire district. Okay, so if we get rid of the state level coordination, who's doing that work? I think the people of Oklahoma should be asking those questions. Yeah.
On the DOJ recommendations regarding the grants, have you heard from Health whether they plan to return that money, or is there an actual effort to return that money?
The State Department of Health will have to speak for themselves on that. My understanding is they are returning the money and that was told to them that they would return that money. And I think when you look at our governor has direct hire and fire over these agency heads, this is what agency heads end up with. They have to answer to the governor for that. And in this case, that means they can't answer for the mission of their organization, which is to serve people with preventative health care. And make sure that people are preventing preventable diseases. So what I see is they're probably going to have to do exactly what the governor's asked of them. I haven't heard differently.
Can you elaborate a little bit on your concerns regarding diabetes funding?
Yeah, I saw that one of the grants that was cut was specifically about preventing type 2 diabetes. Oklahoma has some of the highest rates in the country. I assume it's because it was specifically oriented towards people of color. But what we know is our Native community and our Black community have higher rates of diabetes. So if you're talking about public health, you have to look at those differentiators and work on reaching people where they are. But I haven't gotten the details on it yet. All I know is that any less prevention for diabetes in the state is going to cost us more. We're going to suffer with worse health outcomes. It's going to cost our state more because people will be dealing with more and more chronic and challenging conditions. If we prevent type 2 diabetes, it costs us less and people are more well for longer. So to me, any money that reduces education about diabetes is problematic in this state.
There's been a huge conversation on the block grant thing with education and bringing more of the power back to the states is obviously the conversation they're having on that side. I asked, I can't remember who it was, but Stitt talked about it as well yesterday. Do you trust more power being in the hands of Walters? When it comes to funding, it's been an issue several times in the past.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that and what's your thoughts on block grants in general, I guess?
Yeah, the superintendent has not shown us his ability to plan well for students and for student outcomes. And so I'm deeply concerned about the federal government putting too much control in their hands. We're talking about making sure that kids with disabilities get the programs they need. We're talking about making sure low-income kids are able to get to school and eat lunch if they need to. Those kinds of programs, I do not see a transition plan there. And we haven't seen from Superintendent Walters those kinds of plans, that kind of community engagement, working with districts about what's needed for students. So I would have deep concerns about handing all that back to the states. What we've seen with block grants nationally too is that money doesn't go up. It doesn't respond to the local needs. So what you're going to see is a smaller and smaller pie that we're drawing from. So yeah, that method would be dangerous for Oklahoma.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the House's budget recommendations, and is there anything that stands out to you?
I have not. I looked at the top lines. I'm concerned, flat budgets. The big question is going to be about who's taking out what, recurring money versus one-time money, and that discussion there. I know that with our appropriations process really was working on ARPA this week. We've been doing all the prep work for American Rescue Plan updates, and so I was hoping to look at the House stuff this weekend. Mm-hmm.
Has there been any reaction from leadership regarding your resolution on the standards?
The pro tem was supportive. I told him ahead of time we were doing that because I wanted to make sure he knew the point is for them to pass that resolution. That's our goal. It doesn't have to be my resolution. I'd be glad for a Republican to run that. And he said it was a conversation in his caucus. So I would say generally, I don't see action. I don't see something happening right now, and especially not an agreement between the House and Senate side. So I'm still glad we did it because I don't see how we raise the pressure if we don't. Now, since we released that, I've been told that, and you may actually know this, Sean, which is I've been told that the governor actually can't take action on the standards unless we send him a bill. And that's the thing we're unsure about. Yeah, I think originally the legislature thought that he could act kind of like administrative rules and reject. So if we don't take action, it's not happening. And so I think that's why I hope parents who are concerned about it, educators who are concerned about it, are talking to their legislators.
On Stitt's recent executive order on religious freedoms in schools, I was wondering kind of what you made of the directive in there for state agencies to kind of go back and look at all of their policies that may discriminate based on religion in some way, shape, or form when it has to do with funding and just other programs that the state endorses and sponsors. And then the impending Supreme Court case that's related on St. Isidore, right? It seems a little bit like he's kind of getting ahead of the conversation for those oral arguments literally happen in the court. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, our current laws are focused on religious freedom in that we do not fund any specific religious type. And I know in the arts, in history, in education, that's been because we don't want to give preference to one religion, one denomination over another. And so I think calling it discrimination is actually not an accurate term. And I have big concerns about making something be specifically Christian or specifically a type of Christianity and a specific belief system of Christianity in our classrooms, funding religious programming in churches. Whether that's our duty as state taxpayers, I don't believe it is. And I have real concerns about how you would make sure that that's done fairly and that all faith groups and folks who do not have faith are also treated fairly in that environment.
Is there a difference for you, just really quick, just thinking about the voucher system? between a family getting a voucher to go to a private school that may be faith-based, and making that choice to use state dollars, right, than to go to get a faith-based education. Is there a difference there for you in that scenario versus sponsoring state St. Isidore?
He's asking me about private school vouchers going to religious schools. I mean, I did not support that. I still don't support that. I think when you look at the state paying for religious education, we are using Oklahoma taxpayer dollars to support a specific faith. I think that we know that's why those checks are written to the families, not directly to the schools. That's always been a workaround to avoid saying that money is going to religious education. I mean, I'm glad for families to choose religious education. I just think when we're choosing to spend public money on it, that's a public decision, and then we are endorsing that type of education.
Has the Senate started factoring the effects of the tariff on the budgets coming up?
I do not see our ability to plan for the uncertainties combined between the economic changes and the federal government changes. You know, we'll still be working on the numbers that were projected in February for what we think the revenues will be next year, and that's the type of budget we're going to create. So I haven't had that tariff conversation specifically with our appropriations chair, but I have talked to him about inflation and how we're seeing significant inflation that's affecting the ability to execute programs across the state. When you think about housing costs are going to go up 30 to 50%, I think we're going to see a huge amount of increase in costs, which will mean cutting back on services if we're going to keep things that road building. We can't do the same amount of road building if those costs go up. And we certainly, if we see challenges around tax revenues, if not as many goods are being sold, we're really relying on sales tax still as a state. Income tax and sales tax are really the majority of our budget. So if we see a huge drop off in terms of purchasing, that's going to cause challenges at a state level. And we're having all those conversations about what's important, but I think trying to plan and project is really hard. And I don't know where we are there.
You mentioned some of these projects, you know, the costs are going up and it's hard to complete them. So the Donahue Hospital had about $124 million in overruns that the Department of Mental Health requested additional funding for. The House recommended no further appropriation, and Representative Caldwell said they're looking at another option to purchase another facility. Have you heard anything about this, or what is the Senate thinking about that project?
We are looking at all those American Rescue Plan projects, big capital expenditures. There's projects in Tulsa, there's projects in OKC, there's projects at different facilities. And so we this week started getting updates on where those are and how much has been spent, what's the projections for finishing that money, because those are federal grants that have a deadline. And so I know that we're working towards a public meeting to really vet those decisions. My understanding from the chairman is that we're trying to make those American Rescue Plan, if we're doing reallocations, I'm not talking about funding new projects because that's not in the conversation at all. But there's some conversation about maybe one project is going over and another is going under. Are we going to reallocate that money? My understanding is we're doing that by the end of the month. And so that means getting all that information together quickly. But they're going to have to work on construction estimates based on where we are right now. So that's the hope is can we budget enough to make projects happen regardless of what happens in the economy, and that'll be hard. I do think we need to get to some answers on the mental health facilities. We need those facilities now. We needed them yesterday, and I know staff are wondering. This is a huge challenging time for our public employees at the state and federal level. I've heard from a lot of federal employees just asking for some empathy for their work that they've been doing, and that many of them are under uncertainties. Now state employees as well who've been serving the public who want to get that done for the people, whether that's health programs or school programs, et cetera, and aren't sure what's happening with cuts. And I think that's true with the American Rescue Plan money too, is helping those employees know what's happening next is only fair. Even as a state, if we're talking about efficiency, we need to respect that there are employees trying to get things done for Oklahomans. Yeah.
Do you think some of those ARPA funds have been among those identified by NOJOK to possibly return to the federal government?
I know that as the American Rescue Plan Committee, we are very committed to getting those projects done. So my understanding is that all the funds are encumbered. Now, whether all the funds are contracted is what we're partly working out to make sure that all the funds are contracted, in which case we're not sending the money back, I would hope. I would hope my colleagues would rise up with me and say that's unacceptable if we try to send that money back, because they're all going to important programs that are, and or buildings that are going to make a big difference for the long term.
So it's your understanding that the grants that have been identified are brand-new grants that just they decided there's no use for them?
You're talking about the health grants?
Yes.
Those health grants are not all new. I mean, they're competitive grants. Some of them are CARES grants, things that came out of the COVID era pandemic money. I know that Elon Musk style approach is being taken to other agencies. My big concern is, are they looking at the consequences of those cuts? So I don't think American Rescue Plan's on the table, but what do I know? You know, I'm not the one making those choices. So I would think where else do we have major federal funding? ODOT, are we going to start looking at transportation funding and sending that money back? I don't bet that we do.
This thing's so hazy trying to figure out where it's coming from, but do you think the state got input from the federal government too, from Elon Musk and his crew saying, here's money that we've sent you that you haven't used and we want it back?
I do understand that Elon Musk identified $180 million at the Oklahoma State Department of Health as at-risk money. Now, how much that overlaps with what the state level initiative, I don't know yet. We made our own spreadsheet because we don't have data, and so we're trying to track what we're hearing are the cuts, and we'll try to follow through with that and figure it out. What's your other question? Is that it? Okay, but let's talk again about like big grants sitting out there. 100% of our broadband budget is federal money. How's that going? We're getting those updates now on the American Rescue Plan money, but is that at risk? That's a lot of that is specific for rural audiences.
All playing into the budget talks.
I would assume so. I believe that the joint American Rescue Plan meetings are happened in order to time it along with the JCAB process, the joint appropriation process. You know, I'm not in charge of that, but my understanding is we're trying to tie those things together. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like we're in the midst of this efficiency upgrade, if you want to call it that, or we're trying to kind of do away with federal dollars and kind of find out how we can essentially take over for those kinds of responsibilities or services. When it comes to, excuse me, I'm having a brain fart.
Was it 6 months ago that the governor hired a lobbyist team in D.C. to get more federal money for our state?
I think so. Damn, I lost my question. Sorry about that.
Well, I just
Yeah,
suddenly.
appreciate you.
Yeah.
I will butt in if I remember.
Please. Anything else? Should we wrap up? Thanks y'all for coming.